which may
Right. Yeah.
be right on the horizon here, which has interesting implications when you start looking at the cryptocurrency market in exchange for the U.S. dollar and how that might
Precisely. Yeah.
change things.
Yes. I believe the Chinese and the Germans have already done it. So, yeah, an interesting trend.
Yeah. Though I would say that even the US dollar is right on the verge. I mean, even the way it is today is a lot of ways it's already a cyber currency already. If you think
Yeah.
about how it's exchanged and how it actually activates, I mean, I don't even know what the percentage of the valuation of the US dollar is linked to physical paper money anymore. I mean, it's all done just electronically now. So that line between what a cryptocurrency is and the US dollar is a little bit, maybe the depth of technical integration with blockchain might be the biggest difference. But yeah, I mean, how money is exchanged right now. I mean, just think about your own bank account, right? It's just a number
Precisely.
on the
Yeah.
screen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you can sort of do quick transactions with the U.S. dollar electronically, but really, at the moment, I think it's kind of like a sleight of hand by by the organization that's doing it. Like, oh, your funds transferred immediately, right? And it's like,
Right.
okay, well, really, they have some sort of insurance against fraud, but really, it takes like a day or two to really land in that account. Um,
Well, and the whole concept of printing money now, everybody keeps talking about, well, the government can just go print money. Well, they're not printing money anymore. They're just changing a number in the computer. Right? Yeah.
there's an interesting on the topic of podcasts. There's an interesting podcast. I think it's a Radio Lab podcast called Mint the Coin.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, there is some sort of minting they have to do
Oh, is there? Okay.
to create a certain. They literally create like this $1 billion coin to do some sort of thing, or it's a very interesting ritualistic thing that needs
Yeah.
to
So
be
all
done
these
in certain
worlds are
places.
kind of converging on each other. If you think about it, the whole Bitcoin thing, everything is kind of, so there must be a big inflection point coming. But
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah, yeah, for sure. All right, I'll enough like upfront chit chat. I'll give an introduction to what we're doing
okay.
today, and then we'll dive into conversation. So,
Okay.
for those of you out there checking us out, this is a business podcast mastermind that started with a few talented friends in the business and podcasting space, and expanded to create a weekly event where a wider audience can join. You are joined by several co-hosts, and I will tell you about each one. We have here Rob Greenlee. He is the VP of Content and Partnerships at Libsyn. He is the former chair of the Podcast Academy, co-host of the New Media Show, and longtime evangelist of the podcasting industry. Henry Lopez. He's a serial entrepreneur, small business coach, and host of the top-rated How of Business podcast, dedicated to helping others start, run, and grow their small businesses. We've got Vinay Koshi, host of the Predictable B2B podcast, founder of Sproutworth. He helps others achieve predictable business growth and influence through content marketing. And I'm Ethan Janney, business and executive coach and co-host of the Run With It podcast, which invites 7+ figure entrepreneurs to share business ideas and the action steps to launch them. So this week, we're following up on an interesting guest that we had last time around. His name's Dr. Fred Moss. He's a psychiatrist who has had a podcast for about a year. And we did something interesting with that episode. Primarily, we kind of just talked to him about, the challenges, the questions, the strategies that he's working with at the moment. Tried to give him some advisement, tried to do some brainstorming with him around what he does. And along the way, we got a few tips from him about being present in an interview, because he has so much experience talking to people and developing personal conversations with them. So we got a little bit of feedback from him about how to conduct our interviews in a fresh and intimate way. So I think I think the first couple of things to talk about are just to reflect on what his issues were. We keep hitting a lot of themes here, and I actually talked to him after the fact because it wasn't so obvious to him that we've had these themes that arise. I'd almost like for us to take a meta look at all since we started. There's been themes that arise where I feel like we all feel very confident saying certain things, and it's just because they've been coming up over and over again. These are not scientifically, proven or tested theories. But one of them was that niching down your audience. And that was an interesting one to talk with him about. And I don't know, is there any space that we overdo it on that, saying that niching down our audience is, a really important thing to do, any thoughts on that?
Well, the
Go
thing
ahead.
that comes to me right away as a business coach and working with clients is that's a common theme for people that I help to try to get started. Because what I find is consistent is people come to starting their first business with this grand idea, which is fantastic, right? We need that vision. We need that thing we're going to work towards. But what happens is they don't know how to boil that down or niche down to get started very small, which is what I typically recommend to people like myself who don't have the resources to start, with that big, fully developed vision. Not to mention that the reality is that that's how we find our market, in my experience, is by niching down. So it's the same concept as what I've found is you have to be targeted. I mean, that's a marketing 101, in my opinion, is you have to pick a specific niche, then grow from there.
Yeah, especially as you think about how digital online marketing works. And I think in a lot of ways, creating a podcast is really no different than that, fits into that realm.
Yeah.
You're creating online content, so you need to utilize the tested and proven ways of marketing content online, and that's niching down and getting focused on keywords and keyword phrases and what people are looking for in the search engines. More and more podcast discoveries happening in the search. So,
Yeah.
Thinking about niching down makes a lot of sense, especially just like what you were saying. If you don't have a budget to do a lot of marketing, that's the cheapest way to get organic discovery, right?
That's right. That's right. I think one of the things that happens to us is people think that everybody is listening, that everybody has found them magically. The fact is that I think for most of us, we're a needle in the haystack until we start to get some traction. At least that's my observation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. From what I've seen, putting myself out there for many years, and also having those people that I think of as my kind of go-to people that are sort of famous to me or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because, like you said, number one, not everybody sees what you're doing, and also the people that you think are super influential.
Right.
Often when you look at it or you ask your friend, right, or you ask somebody else, oh, so and so, and they're like, who?
Right.
Exactly.
But because you're so familiar with them and their voice and they're influential to you, and of course a bunch of other people that are like you,
Mm-hmm.
kind of see them as this sort of mega star.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting. There was a Indie Hackers podcast interview around this guy who started a website. It's one of the top websites online. Forget the exact name of it, but I want to say it's called Celebrity Birthdays or something like this.
Oh my.
And this guy, he just really went in, talk about niching down. He very committed to he does what that website is and what people want out of that website. And one of the things that he found over time was there was a huge market for people wanting to know about these niche celebrities, like a Twitter celebrity that nobody knows about except their Twitter fan base, right? Or a YouTube celebrity that nobody knows about except their YouTube fan base. So one of the things that he really got into was, how can I find out who the next celebrities are that people want to hear about, but they're not necessarily big time celebrities that everybody knows of, like Tom Cruise or something, but they're sort of these micro celebrities that have their own little,
Or they're on the rise, or they're
Absolutely. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And there's so
And
much more of that now, right? Because we have all of these platforms that have an amplifier of some sort.
Right. Yeah, it's no longer like Greta Garbo, it's
right.
no longer
You either were a movie star or a TV
Bogart.
star or a radio
Right.
star, and that was it. Now there's all these platforms on which you could have a tremendous following. Yeah.
Yeah. And he found that out, by the way, because he kept very close attention to what people would search for. So he would find you know, he would look and see what people are searching for. He would like, who is this? Why are they searching for this? Why are they searching? And then he would just add the people that were searched for a lot, but he didn't know about, to the kind of celebrities that they would feature and their birthday and little facts about them and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I do think that there's been some sort of a leveling of the playing fields somewhat around celebrity over the last, since the pandemic happened, because people are all basically doing the same thing with online, with media now, right? If you think about all the big TV networks, a lot of what's going on, everybody's kind of on Zoom, you know, everybody's doing the same thing. So these stratification of celebrity is probably not as cool as it used to be either. I think more people feel like they can be a celebrity than ever before, right? So this following and this worshiping of celebrity, I think, is diminished a little bit now, and I think that may be one of the big things that we come out of this pandemic with, is more of a leveling of the playing field around that concept of celebrity.
Yeah, people are kind of getting kind of tired of their celebrities being aloof and, you know, unapproachable, right? I remember when beginning of the pandemic, I actually used to watch Colbert more than Jimmy Fallon, if I watched any of that late night stuff. But it was really cool going into Jimmy Fallon's house with him. Like, and he like, you know, he kind of had that really home, you know, special home personal feel, and he introduced you to his kids and his wife.
Right.
I started to like that more because, and whereas Stephen Colbert, it was usually mostly just him in front of the camera, and he was kind of trying to maintain a more formal approach to things.
Right.
And Jimmy Kimmel, I feel like he just does a bad job in general.
It's interesting. I wonder if it's more. You think it's more of Colbert? What's his last name?
Colbert.
Yeah.
He's kind of playing a character on his show to an extent. I wonder if that was his thinking on why keep it not this. I'm not necessarily that guy at home.
Right. Yeah. It's a tough situation.
Yeah. He's always kind of played a character. I mean, if you think about his show that he had on Comedy Central for a long time, he was a liberal playing a conservative.
Right. A pretend conservative. So
it was interesting. I think he has gone more genuine in his show now.
Yes, I think so too.
Yeah. But this distinction between celebrity and normal people, I think, has been a little bit more normalized now, and I'm not sure where that's going to go next.
Yeah, and at the risk of throwing something out that maybe everybody already knows about, I think the turning point for me in my awareness of this was the Kevin Kelly 1,000 True Fans concept. From Wired magazine, where he kind of said, that's all you really need to make a good living is 1,000 people who are enthusiastic about what you do, and will basically buy whatever you put out there. Right. So I'm interested if we might try picking apart some people who are big, but try to figure out where their niche began. Like, I'm thinking Joe Rogan. I know we're all probably not like diehard Joe Rogan fans, but we all know Joe Rogan and listen to his show. So he's like a really good example of someone who's sort of reached the state where everybody knows about him. But who do you think his niche is? Is it like MMA
it's interesting you said, because
fighters?
I didn't know who he was because I'm not an MMA fan, and so I didn't know that he had. I didn't know him as a comedian, and I don't follow MMA. So I think that's a perfect example where I wasn't aware of him until his show became so huge.
I think he got a lot of his early notoriety from the Fear Factor, which was a TV show in the early days.
Which I never watched either. Yeah.
Right. And, the show where groups of people ate like, bugs and stuff and jumped off of things and all sorts of weird.
He was the host of that for some time.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
And I think go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, in essence, though, that isn't very aligned with his authenticity. He kind of reflects back on, I did that stupid show for a while just because it was, it was like shoot me, and he would just do it to make a buck. He was appreciative of it, so on and so forth. But it seems like what he's doing now, even though he may have kind of brought along some of that MTV, generation along with him for his show, it might not have been a direct. Well,
he's a little bit of a rough character, right? He's MMA. You know, he's just kind of a macho kind of a guy, right? I mean, and I think to a lot of people that's an appealing personality. But I think he's really honed in his skills around how he talks to people and how he brings out conversations with people. You know, like an Elon Musk interview or whatever. He got Elon to smoke marijuana on his podcast. You know, I mean, that's things like that kind of, you know, make you break out a little bit. You know, it's not a common thing.
Right. I'm getting the sense that maybe of everyone here, I'm probably the most close to his niche audience. You know, the kind of maybe slightly athletic, but also he's got that kind of like non-jock athletic thing where he's kind of intellectual and, you know, is interested in meditation and ayahuasca and, you know, rock and roll and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Are you saying the rest of us are couch potatoes? Is that what you're trying to say?
No, I'm listing various attributes that in combination
Right.
might represent one of his listeners. So you could have
my
any given one
challenge
of them. You can
with
like
him
rock
is
and roll and whatever.
I don't think he's that great of an interviewer. That's my challenge with him. But he gets very interesting people on the show.
He does. Yeah. Yeah.
And my other frustration with him and all these others is these celebrity podcasters have made it even harder for us to gain an audience to some extent, even though we're not going for the same audience. They're the ones that are hogging the directories, if you will, to get easily found. And we're going to see more and more and more of it. It's not going to stop, right? So it's interesting. But I have the same opinion of, I always draw a blank on his name. He has one of the top business shows, 4-Hour Workweek author.
Tim Ferriss.
Thank you.
Tim.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
And similarly, they have a format. Well, they might go on for an hour or 2 hours sometimes talking, which is interesting, you know. But again, he gets interesting guests. So it's what do we learn from it is what's challenging. It's interesting. I've always tried to learn from people who have done it, the art of asking good questions, and just throw in a completely different tangent here, Ethan. Sorry about this. But I was listening to some replays on YouTube of Larry King interviewing when he was doing it well. I think towards the end, sorry, Larry, he was getting a little sloppy, but he was a great interviewer because I think he knew how to really ask good, short questions and then shut up. And so I really appreciate it.
Interestingly, I did watch a couple a Larry King interview recently. It just happened to come up in my YouTube feed. And it was Larry King and Russell Brand. And
interesting.
And I had the same observation. I was like, oh, Larry King's just asking like a quick sentence question. He's not going deep into anything specific, but he knows enough about the person and he feels comfortable with them enough and they trust him enough that he can just say, and what do you think about that? And then they just go and they say something interesting and it's not boring or, you know.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I mean, think about it, not that many celebrities are successful podcasters, though.
Interesting. Why is that, you think?
Because it takes a certain type of personality to do this and dedication that a lot of celebrities just don't have. I mean, a lot of, especially actors, they are very dependent on scripts for their success, right? And once you talk to them in real life, some of them don't have very good personalities. So I went through it a little bit working at Podcast One down in Los Angeles because there was a steady flow of celebrities coming in trying to get shows on the Podcast One platform, and very few of them actually were successful. They'd launch shows and they'd pick up some audience, but oftentimes it wasn't enough to make it worth their time. And they would stop. I also worked with Larry King on a podcast that he started on Podcast One as well.
Is that right?
He was friends with the CEO that I worked for down there. So he was in the office all the time. He did Larry did a podcast with his wife. And this whole podcast was basically he and his wife kind of bickering between the two of them. And it didn't do very well. So I think Larry peaked out at about 2,000 downloads.
Interesting. That
per-
does bring something to mind,
Right.
Ethan, that, you
Right.
started this conversation with those observations. I think what I also heard from Dr. Fred, and this isn't, anything on him, but what
Mhm.
that brings to mind a common thing is people seem to think that there's a short game here. I don't, for us, again, with limited budgets, I think it's a long-term play to gain an audience.
It is. It takes time.
Well, yeah.
I mean,
even the folks
even
that we, yeah.
yeah,
Go ahead.
even celebrities, it takes time to grow. Yeah, it's not a magic thing.
Exactly.
I think a lot of people
Yeah.
get into this medium thinking they can grow fast,
Right.
and a lot of people stop because it's not growing fast enough
Yeah.
for them. But what they don't realize is that growth happens in spurts. It doesn't happen consistently.
Right. And I say that because I think I heard Dr. Fred relate to, he was looking at a couple of opportunities to, take it to the next level. I can't remember what he said exactly, but it led me to think like, I don't think this is the case, but I've heard from others that people get frustrated because they don't get traction early on. The people that I've talked to, very few that have come to me for advice on podcasting, I've said, that's why why are you doing the show is so important. Yeah. And especially if you've got delusions about monetizing a show. For the average person like myself, to monetize a show anytime soon, I think is a little delusional, in my opinion. Meaning directly, right? For all of us, I think we've learned and know that it feeds something else for most of us. Yeah.
Oh, there's some interesting, a couple of things to bring up. Definitely, if you look like someone like Joe Rogan, who we mentioned earlier, that's, as much as you might think he's started out as a big celebrity that was on Fear Factor, his thing is because he's been around. He's been one of the longest running podcasts.
How long has he been doing it now?
I think he started in 2010, I think 2011, something like that.
Yeah. And you look at I don't know a Gary Vee podcast. I know he's in the top, but I never listened to it. But I do know, it's like, here he was with that wine library TV thing back in the day,
He started that show back I met Gary back in 2008 at South by Southwest. That was the first time that I met him, and he was just getting going with this wine library podcast. And that was a video podcast back then. So it wasn't, he wasn't playing around with audio, but now now it's completely different for him now, but that was in the early days. But yeah, so there's the game of video, and then there's the game of audio, and a lot of people, it's always fascinating to me to talk to content creators, because some of them are very much inclined toward video and some of them are inclined towards audio. And oftentimes that they get down this path. I just talked to a person just the other day where they're finding more success on the YouTube, on the video side. And I asked them, so have you thought about the audio from this? And it is what you're doing very visual as well. And they go, no. And I go, you're getting significant traffic onto your YouTube. And I asked them, how long is your YouTube video? Is it an hour? And I'm like going, what? That's not normal to have a huge audience on YouTube. That's primarily an audio podcast like what we're doing. And I said, have you thought about taking the audio out of that and putting it out as a podcast? And he goes, I didn't really think about it that much. And I'm like going, okay, you might be giving up a huge chunk of potential audience. If your show is popular on YouTube and you're not really that much visual, then you could get another 80% just on the audio side. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Would you say, Rob, that podcasts are better geared towards engaging audiences as opposed to growing audiences?
Yeah, I would say that it is, especially if it's live. I'm a big fan of live video. I'm not a big fan of pre-recorded video, at least with podcasting. Obviously doing it live creates basically a pre-recorded video that's available on replay. But to produce a video that isn't live, I think is it needs to be pretty good in order to work, I think.
Yeah, true. So what about, to follow up on some of the things you said, Rob, it is actually quite interesting and I think you probably have a special understanding of this. There are these people who had success with radio, for example, and it's like, oh, then so I'll start a podcast. And then, for whatever reason right now, it could be just the time difference. Maybe radio was back then and, they've got different things to talk about that are appealing to a smaller audience or whatever. But I definitely seen this a few times, like someone who had a big radio show you'd hear in your car if you were driving around the city, and, they're just can't get their podcast to get off the ground or something,
Well, I mean, a lot of the radio folks have a hard time getting out of that mindset of doing radio type of shows, and it's I think oftentimes the radio folks think that doing a podcast like a radio show is the right model, and it's
Right.
missing the point. That's why a lot of local radio stations really kind of flounder with podcasting, is because they think radio and apply it to podcasting instead of thinking podcasting is something unique from radio. And a lot of them have a hard time with that transition because it forces them to do duplicate content, or it forces them to utilize resources that they don't have, right? Or they don't want to allocate to podcasting because they don't see a direct financial benefit by doing it, oftentimes because of the scale of the audiences that they generate from it typically isn't very good. So it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy they create for themselves.
Mm.
So
Yeah, I'm also thinking, I don't know if you guys are aware of Bob Dylan's thing he calls Theme Time Radio Hour.
I haven't seen this.
I think that's what it is, Theme Time Radio. Yeah. What I like about that, I've listened to a few of those, and I think he might have just did it for a little bit and then stopped. But I loved listening to that when I did, because it was like, Bob Dylan, but it was like his little niche little thing where he had little clips and talked about, it kind of had that feeling of like an intimate little radio show on the transistor, and, very much more personal and less in your face than, your big Bob Dylan rock star kind of thing going on.
Right.
Definitely appreciated checking that out.
Sounds interesting.
So all right. So I think we definitely reclaimed our belief, and Henry especially had some great arguments from the sort of business perspective that niching is one of the secrets here of getting started. And then just at some point you have the ability to go to a larger scale, but it sort of rides in the back of your foundational, client avatar that you have a specific connection with. It is interesting to look at the difference between radio and podcasting. First thing that comes to my mind is like This American Life, which, I'm sort of grew up in the Chicago area. So I grew up listening to that on the radio. And it was one of those things. It's like, well, you want to turn the radio, you just want to find something, and that happens to be it. So you're like, oh, that's great, I love this, and oh, I'm glad that's on, great, turn it up, and then, or maybe listen to it at home if you get into the habit of it. But they've actually, I still listen to them, for one of my favorite as a podcast. So that's really fascinating. And I'm trying to think, I just tried to think of another example of, do they have clearly they have kind of a niche audience. Public NPR in and of itself has a kind of a niche audience, liberal leaning, kind of quiet,
well, their radio is produced
type.
Right. Their radio productions are produced more compatible with podcasting. Just their model of how they do things really is much more intimate, much more personal, much more less commercial, less yell in your face, less breaks driven. So the formats of public radio have always been more compatible with the podcasting medium, and that's why you've seen happen with what's happened with This American Life and Planet Money and all these, is because they're produced in a way that, and more, I think that the public media has positioned themselves to think digital first. And then when they produce digital first, then they create these hybrid versions for radio and then for podcasting. And then they do some creative editing. And they also utilize dynamic ad insertion in a real cutting edge way that oftentimes people don't even realize because it's done in such a good way. They've basically optimized it where they can they can do targeted ads in National Public Radio content that people can't even tell. That's different than what they do on the radio.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm curious, Vinay, you're from Australia. Is This American Life a thing? Or is that just like, oh, what is that? What is you aware of that?
Yeah, I'm aware of it. I'm not sure a lot of people actually listen into it, though.
In Australia, right?
Yeah.
Do you have anything similar, or do you know what the concept of that show is? And
vaguely, I mean, I think I listened to an episode some years ago.
Right.
In terms of something similar, I'm not sure we have one that is similar. We do have a program on the national broadcaster ABC that does do like a feature on certain people in Australia who have achieved a degree of I wouldn't say fame, but certainly achieved something in their particular field.
Okay.
So yeah, and do a bit of a background and
I would agree that the ABC folks have done a lot of terrific content in the podcasting sphere and a lot of storytelling stuff. They've done a really good job, but not unlike what NPR has done with podcasting on their radio waves too. And you see it in the CBC as well up in Canada. There's a lot of terrific content that's being produced up there, and what's causing that to happen. And Vinay, tell me if I'm correct on this, is that it has such an influence on those markets that indie producers think that they have to compete with that, right? And it does kind of tend to scare some independent producers out of the market to some degree to try and keep up with those folks.
I think that was true to a point, but in the last few years,
it's changed.
I think there's been a bit of a shift to, in the recognition that I do have a voice, and if I put it out there, I'll get an audience. So
do you say that it's reached kind of, getting close to parity with what you see out of North America, that kind of thing? Or do you think that there's still a gap there between the amount of indie production versus the public radio side?
Oh, there's still a gap, but I'm not sure that here in Australia we have as many people who would be interested in doing that sort of thing. Number one. Number two, to produce something of quality,
right,
does take a fair bit of investment, and again, it's not for everyone, and it's becoming more of a competitive space. So I think people kind of put a lot more thought and caution into diving into something like this and trying to make it a big production.
Yep. Yeah, I saw something similar happen when I was up in Canada at the Vancouver Podcast Festival. The CBC came in and did a workshop. It was like a 3-hour workshop on how they produce a true crime series. And they brought in like the producer, host, and basically the production team came in and presented to a group of us how they produced their true crime podcast series that was very popular in Canada. And it was like, it was just so complex, technically challenging. The production flow was almost like producing a television series, right? With all the equipment that you needed and stuff. And people walked out of the presentation. They were just like shaking their heads going, there's no way I could do this, right? But that's the perception of what they're competing against in oftentimes in those markets. And that's what I saw happen too. I mean, there was a lot of people that went into that thinking, oh, I'm going to learn how to produce a true crime series, right? And they walked out of there thinking, there's no way I'm doing that, because it was just so, and it's so intimidating, right? The whole process of doing it. And anyway, I'm hoping that we kind of move away from the intimidation of producing good quality podcast content, but it was pretty shocking to me.
I've got a sort of pseudo kind of tangential but somewhat related question, and I want to put it to you, Rob, just because you've been in the space so long. You've seen so many people go through, probably even more intimate level, go through different levels of their career in podcasting and media and stuff. In terms of investing in up-leveling quality, getting a nice camera or microphone, or the production quality and things like that, have you seen any patterns? Like if somebody has $1,000 in their bank account, but they haven't, they don't have to spend it. They could save it and go on vacation or put it in their IRA or whatever. Like, do you think it's used? Or there's a return on investment when people say, you know what, though, I'm going to get a pro setup and, get all this stuff together.
No, I think it's a great question, because I actually am just been going through that myself. I invested some additional money in a high quality camcorder, 4K camcorder as my webcam. So that's what I'm using here. And then I've got a whole big setup. I've got a teleprompter. I've got new microphones. I've got a Roadcaster here. I invested in that kind of stuff. So I think, especially now coming out of the COVID situation, I think people, and you saw it to some degree in the mainstream media in the early days of the pandemic, where most of them were doing their shows from home, and the quality was a little shaky in the early days. I don't know if you guys remember back in March and April, and then over time it got better and better and better again. But I think that now more than ever, I think if you want to succeed in your career, you want to succeed in creating online content, I think you have to up your game a little bit. And I think you have to get a good quality microphone. I think you need to get a good quality webcam. I know back in that time, all the webcams were all sold out on Amazon. So you couldn't even get like a C920 Logitech webcam. So more and more people were driven to buy SLRs or camcorders as their webcams. And that was a little bit of a technical challenge for people, because I went through it too, because that's when I invested in all this stuff too. But I realized what was happening is, if I was going to be able to compete in this new space of what was happening, I needed to up my game too, and be able to produce higher quality content than I had prior. Because I was doing so much traveling, I wasn't producing a lot of content myself. But now that I was being at home and I could do this more, I needed to up my game a little bit too. And I think a lot of other people could benefit from that, from their careers, from other things that they're doing in their lives too. Though, I don't think everybody likes to stay home and stay in front of a monitor all day long, but that's the reality. And I think as we come out of the COVID, I think that's still going to be the reality.
Mm-hmm. Henry, you don't video record and send out your podcast, right?
No, it's been something that I've been wanting to do, setting as a goal. I know that I need to do it, but I keep stopping myself because I'm already investing so much time in producing my show. Mm-hmm. So I have to be very careful with getting distracted with those kind of things. And I have to be careful with measuring what is it really doing for me as far as generating revenue. Mm-hmm. So I have to be very careful with that, and especially the last few years where I've been in between primary business, I've had to be very judicious about where my time goes. So already producing one episode on average is about 4 hours worth of my time, mm-hmm. and 1 hour's worth of an assistant's time. So that's why I haven't done it. Now, you could argue, well, it's just not that much additional time. And you're right, but it's just, to me, what I haven't been able to jump or cross the hurdle on is the dynamics of also having to worry about a visual component in addition to me being immersed in conducting an interview that's just audio. I haven't been able to make that transition effectively. So I'll do it sporadically when it makes sense, but haven't been able to make that transition. I get it. I understand, YouTube is becoming a search engine, a visual search engine, and there's value there. I just haven't been able to justify it yet.
Well, I asked you specifically for two reasons. Well, really for one reason, but then I had a follow-up point to make. The one reason is I was just looking at you and I was like, oh yeah, I feel like you in a video format with another person. I could see you with the background and how a business thing, and it feels like it would be a nice natural fit to just how you already existing and just adding kind of like a nice clean background. I just feel like there's something about that that feels like it's just a good fit for you, but that's just a very intuitive thing. But the other thing I wanted to share too is, there's some, if you don't want to edit the videos, right? If you just want to put up raw videos, like I've been doing for our podcast, I've been doing this for all sorts of different projects. It's not that hard. It doesn't take much extra time or investment. There's some services where you can just kind of send the stream over and have it post automatically. So that's an option too.
Have you been able to, what have you been able to attribute to being on YouTube as far as growth of your audience?
It depends on the project. I would say the project that has been most fruitful has been this piano technicians project. And people found me on YouTube. Like I had a YouTube, I just started putting it on my own personal YouTube channel just to put it somewhere so that it could be streamed. And then all of a sudden people started subscribing to my YouTube. Like it's one of those things where I used to put up YouTube videos and hope people watched them and subscribed to them. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I had all these subscribers. And it was almost, if I put up what I traditionally put on my YouTube channel, they'd be like, huh? Because they thought they were subscribing to the piano guy's YouTube channel. Right. And I've got stuff from when I was posting videos for my PhD project and just like all sorts of different things are up there. So that one is the one where, people noticed it there, they find it there, and they probably would find it even more if I was able to take the time to, I don't even really update the titles on those videos or put text in or anything like that. But that has been useful. And we do see people watching us on Facebook. And every week I do this thing where we only show the first 15 to 20 minutes and they'll go, okay, everybody, we're going to sign off the live stream on Facebook and YouTube. And if you want to join the Zoom call, you got to go to this link and you got to register. And it's not a ton, but we always get a handful of people that then join the Zoom call after that. And then we, if they're new, then we get their email address and, kind of get the process going, get them involved with things. So it depends. I think it depends on the project. And I think that's really interesting. It's kind of like Rob alluded to earlier with this, things grow in spurts, right? And I think part of the growing in spurts is that you try these different things and some of them work and some of them don't. You don't know which one's going to work. So. And that's a really interesting case in point. It works well for certain projects and others. It's not like I've seen anything special.
Hey, since we went off on that tangent on NPR, a couple other people that I think are magnificent at interviewing are Terry Gross with Fresh Air. Her show is Fresh Air on NPR. And I listen to it as a podcast as well. And then Chris Boyd, her show is Think. Those two ladies, if you want to listen to masterful interviewers, are great examples. The thing that's different about them, though, is they are classic journalistic interviewers. In other words, they try not to bring their personality into it, which is very different from what we do. But just as an aside, I think they're excellent to learn from.
Yeah, actually, Terry was a speaker at Podcast Movement a couple of years ago. Yeah. She was up on stage and she's very, very much a pro radio person. So she thinks about what she does more from a radio perspective than she does at all from a podcast. I mean, she doesn't even consider herself to be a podcaster.
Is that right? Interesting.
Yeah. So,
that's fascinating.
Because that's who she's positioned towards, is that live interview on the radio. Yeah. So, right.
But again, because the pace of NPR is such that it really does match a lot of our pace as a podcast, right? We're not worrying about the commercial break. We've got 30 minutes to half an hour to an hour. And so we can take our time in a conversation. I think that's why those shows are more back to the point you were making, Ethan, about do they translate? Do they become successful podcasts?
Yeah. Also, just going back to something that came up earlier about how fast could people get going. I do think there are some people who have, for whatever reason, they've been able to get going a little bit faster than the rest, I mean,
any common things you've seen there as to why that's been, I mean, you're not talking about celebrity or any kind of other
It's a good. Well, yeah. I mean, even if it is a celebrity, right? We already established like that doesn't necessarily give them a leg up. On
No,
the
but it gives them a
podcasting space.
start with their audience, does it not? With
Right.
their
Right.
fans, yeah.
Well,
Well, I'll
it
say
does give
this.
you a little bit of a leg up on the
Sure.
publicity side, right?
Yes, good point. Yeah.
Right. Two things two things that come to mind. There is the Tim Ferriss thing, right? I think even though his podcast has grown since he started, I think he was very strategic about launching it, and I think he's able to say I launched number one. I think he was kind of
Well,
one of
Tim
the
has been
early
doing
people.
his show a long time too.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's now, but still, even when he first started, it was successful relatively quickly. He
Mm-hmm.
had sort of like, it's kind of like his first book, right? Like was a bestseller, right? He kind of, he has this sort of strategic attitude.
Yep.
Another one is that I can think of is like the Nathan Lotka podcast, The Top. That's a business podcast. I know he makes some pretty significant income from that. He's a young guy who hasn't been doing it that long.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you say like the common themes, that's interesting. I haven't really reflected on it, but it is interesting. There is kind of like it seems like the theme would be a planning and strategizing aspect of like, okay, I know what I'm doing here. I'm going to launch at this time. And maybe they have very set goals of what they want to do. And then behind the scenes before they launch, they're kind of talking to people, doing research and like planning and strategizing specifically. Now, not to guarantee that kind of thing would work, but that seems to be the pattern with maybe some of these people that are getting going a little bit more quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of I think shows that get traction early and quick are ones that are tapping into a growing area of interest that are unique, that can tap into some memes or some trends that are happening. I think we saw that with the COVID thing too. A lot of shows popped up covering COVID because people were interested in finding out more information on what was happening with that. And then you saw it with Donald Trump. You saw it with the political campaigns. People were jumping in on that. Those aren't as popular now because people aren't as interested as they were in the early days. So it's tapping into current themes and current topics can have a short spurt of popularity that they may not last. That's the bigger question.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, well, we're running out of time here. It's been a good conversation for the day. I don't know if there's anything else we want to say to wrap up, or should we call it
just
a day?
at our next one now is when?
So moving forward, our next session will be in March. This is March. Okay, so
yeah, we're March 1st. Yeah.
Right, we're already here for March. So technically, then we should have our next session 2 weeks from now, right?
So the 15th, March 15th.
The 15th of March.
15th.
And then next week we'll have a skip, and I'll reach out. Yeah, we can. Well, that's that, and we can talk. I'll sign us offline, and we can talk a little bit about that stuff. But is there anything else to wrap up the show with?
I'll plan on getting us set up on Clubhouse for the 15th.
Okay.
So we can simul stream, and I can bring in guests into the show as well. So
okay, that sounds good. All right, I'll sign us off stream.